Those who have been in a coma. What was it like? I was in medically induced coma for about a week. The coma itself is not much to talk about. There is just a gap in your memory, even from before it happened. I don't even remember the accident that brought me there in the first place. Waking up from it is much different story though. Since I was fully dosed by painkillers and sedatives and whatnot, I was basically high as kite. Since the trauma I suffered was very serious, my brain constructed very stressful, vivid nightmares I remember to this day. I was in a very short coma, 6 days after a brain hemorrhage. I recall nothing during the coma. I have a fuzzy understanding of my first week or two after waking up, having pieced it together by the stories I was told, and memories of the days leading up to it were temporarily wiped out, though they have since returned. This was over a decade ago, so take this with a grain of salt. My memory in general is imperfect at best. Edit. I should mention that my coma was induced so they could stabilize me and drain the blood via my skull. My wife was in a coma for about a month. At first I didn't bring the kids up because of how she looked, but in the third week her color was closer to normal and there was less stuff going on, as she was pretty stable compared to the first 2 weeks. Anywho, I had told the kids that while mom wasn't responsive, there was a chance could she hear us, so they should be as brave as they can and sound as happy as they can. I described to them everything I thought that might spook them, from the tubes and wires to things beeping randomly and doctors and nurses coming and going. They were awesome. Even in the initial shock at seeing her with a ventilator, they were vocally loving. Hugged and patted, held her hand, etc. We sat in the room a while and just talked. At one point I asked the kids what their favorite vacation was. Instead of our Disney and Universal Studios trips, they both agreed it was the road trip we took from Vegas down to Arizona, driving all over and seeing all the incredible sights. We talked about rides and amusements in Vegas, then Hoover Dam, the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, cave dwellings, petrified forest, silly road stops, a cheap motel we stayed in Flagstaff. We laughed and cried just a little. It was as nice as it could be. They kissed her goodbye saying, "See you soon." My wife heard it all, but in a hallucinatory way. She now has, to this day, near 10 years later, a vivid memory of a second Arizona vacation she went on with us. She even asked me early on after she woke up if we had gone on a vacation recently. Her mind went through every detail we talked about and even added onto it as if it all actually happened and the memories of it are as real as any. 10 days I don't remember her anything about. Not sure if it is a blessing or a curse. Hit by a drunk driver. My wife and I lived. Our daughter didn't. To me, that stuff on TV where the PT wakes up and everything goes back to normal is bullshit. When I woke up, I was in a conversation with another PT. Air Force had sick bays, not individual rooms. I can only compare it to a computer. I had been hung in an update and then flicker, new screen. I had woken up several days earlier, but nothing stayed with me. My wife says I was paranoid that they were putting acid in my IV because I was tripping. I was hostile and aggressive. I read the medical records. They kept me restrained for a couple of days after I hit a nurse. I started acting normal, so they moved me from ICU to the sick bay. The blessing is forgetting 10 days of some pretty intense pain. I was broken in a lot of places and bruised and all the rest. Never knew you could bruise some of them. That freaked me out. The curse was I wasn't there when my wife needed me most. There is that tinge of guilt that she faced that grief alone for 10 days. I know. Couldn't be helped. Not my fault. But live through it and tell me how it feels. I had meningitis when I was 12, which got misdiagnosed for stomach flu and ended up with me being taken to the hospital last minute. The last memory I had was falling asleep, watching the emergency news on the Brussels airport attack. I later on had a sort of fever dream. which ended up to be true. About my parents driving me to TGE or saying, "It's okay," over and over again. I couldn't move or talk, so it seemed more like a dream than something that was actually happening. I saw the lights of the parking lot, which made me close my eyes, and after that it was like taking a nap. I had no awareness of time at all. It's like going to sleep and just waking up what feels like a second later, but it's actually morning already. I woke up 6 days later, highly drugged, but only gained consciousness the day after. My first memory, after waking up, is opening my laptop in the hospital bed to play Minecraft. I have no idea what happened or what I said when I woke up before that. I had a motorcycle wreck a few years ago. Someone texting blew a stop sign and 8 ended up T-boning them. Not sure if coma is the correct term, but I was definitely unconscious for 2 days. Honestly, just felt like the worst, least refreshing nap in the history of naps. Had the wreck on a Sunday. Woke up sometime Tuesday afternoon, evening, and asked if the bike was okay. It wasn't. Not me, but my dad has described his coma after his car accident. He was pulled up a little too far at a stop sign, and a guy who was speeding in on his phone swerved off the road. So he was in a coma for about 2 months. On my end, it wasn't like the movies. He didn't just wake up miraculously. It was 2 months of steady improvements. One eye opened. Then a few days later his other eye was half open. Then he could wiggle a toe. Then he could move his fingers, etc. On his end, he said he could hear bits and pieces of what was happening around him. But it was like a dream that he couldn't wake up from. When me and my 2 younger siblings would come in and talk to him, his heart rate would go down. When a football game was on and his friends came to sit with him and watch it, the nurses made them turn it off once his team started losing because his heart rate blew up. Edit. He's a fan of the Miami Dolphins, so I guess his HR never fully returned to normal. Edit 2. An award? I've never got an award before! Exclamation mark. But seriously, thanks for the awards and the stories, guys. There was a kid named Martin Pistorius who fell into a coma for 12 years, but his mind woke up 2 years into it. However, he was unable to speak or move, and everyone believed he was a vegetable at best. This wasn't the case. His mind was fully there. For over a decade he was mistreated in facilities that played Barney repeats every single day for years without him being able to look away. True mental torture. He was also physically and sexually abused on top of that. At one point he couldn't stop throwing up, so the nurses tube-fed him his own vomit. His parents were unaware of all this and tried adapting the best they could. In some of the lowest moments, he remembers his mother telling him she wishes he would just die. Yet all he could feel was compassion for how she felt. Eventually someone who cared enough realized he was responsive enough and got him the help he needed, and now he has a wife and kids. Talks like Stephen Hawking, and is a computer programmer. Really shows how you can still emerge from the deepest, darkest places of life. If anyone is wondering, it happened to him due to cryptococcal meningitis. Fungus covered his brain and spinal cord. The disease comes from soil with infected bird droppings being inhaled. One day he was just an innocent 12-year-old playing outside, only for his life to be changed because of simply breathing in some kicked up dirt. Glad he came out on top in the end. His TED Talk. I was in a coma for 3 days following a serious cycling accident. Medically induced. I woke up with zero recollection of why I was there or what was said while I was out. It is easily the scariest situation I found myself in, but I can't say I remember it. I woke up to my mom and dad in the hospital with me and my body in traction of some sort, and that was way scarier to me. You were actually just really tired. Glad you're still with us. Any side effects from the injury are coma. This is so interesting to read everyone's experience. I'm an ICU nurse and I work with patients in comas all the time. I talk to them. I let them know why I'm touching them, whether it be to give them medication, draw lab work, bathe them, clean them after an incontinent episode. I'll also reorient them to where, why, and how they're in that situation. I'll also tell them when their loved ones call to check on them. I would feel awful knowing someone I took care of had flashbacks of feeling violated during a coma. My wife was in a diabetic coma for 2 weeks when she was in elementary school. She knew her sugar was low. Then all of a sudden she woke up in the hospital with absolutely no idea that any time had passed. Edit. I'm just gonna throw this S down since this is blowing up. She loved this video. Sugar inhibits our natural ability to time travel. Got it. Got hit by a truck. I was in a coma for 4 days. It felt like a power nap but in the hospital. Edit. I was worried when I woke up. I had no idea where or why I was. I doubt any of us know why we are. Yay, 300 horsepower. Got hit by a truck. And that is how you get transported to another world to save it. I wasn't in one for long, just under a week. While I was in the coma, I didn't remember a thing. When I came out of it, I just remember hearing my mom yell to the attending, "He's up." Then I woke up with a bunch of white coats in the room. I was super stiff and incredibly confused. Oddly enough, I kept having vivid dreams of myself in the coma after the fact. Still have them to this day. They're almost like an out-of-body experience because I can see myself laying in the bed with people around me. Was hit by a car when I was 5 years old. Ended up with toxic shock syndrome and went into a coma for 4 months. I just remember some very weird dreams, which I can still recall vividly 26 years later. Someone mentioned something about visiting another realm, and that's pretty close to the mark. What happened in these dreams? Just curious. How did you acquire toxic shock syndrome? I've only heard of women getting it when they keep their tampon in for too long. In 2016 I was in a coma from March 31st to May 5th. Then half awake for another month after that. It was like the longest, scariest dream of my life. I was medically induced by a fentanyl drip for about a week at first, and let me tell you, fentanyl is a demon. Wacky dreams about fighting corrupt hospital officials. So my brain knew where I was. They did think I'd ever talk or walk again. But in the hospital bed I laughed at an episode of that 70s show and inclined every day after, putting me at about 85% health overall these days. But pretty much an average guy. Oh, it was a head injury. Had a seizure in the bathroom that made me fall onto the sink. I can only compare it to when you're little and wake up at a friend's house and don't know where you are. I was in a coma for 2 months after a bad car accident. It wasn't medically induced. It was thanks to brain damage. When I woke up I was alone in the hospital room and had no clue what happened or why I was there. I had a neck brace on due to a broken neck, so I figured something was wrong with my neck, but was unsure how or what happened. For some reason I thought I was 60 years old. I was in my 20s. I was paranoid and scared, but didn't know why I was there. I used context clues to figure out I was in the hospital. It was frightening. After about 5 minutes I decided to go back to sleep. 2 months of sleep wasn't quite long enough. When I was in 5th grade, one fell out of a tree and bonked my head pretty well. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. For me, the experience is easily summarized in 3 parts. When I fell, I blacked out before I hit the ground. Or at least that is where memory fades. And fades is really the best word. It was as if my consciousness was drained away and then blackness and nothingness. It was as if my body knew how badly it was going to hurt, and so it shut down. I have very, very, very vague memories while in the coma of hearing my dad reading a book, or my mom telling me that she knew I would pull through, or of a tube in my nose. But these were always super fuzzy moments and I never was conscious during them. It was more like a half second of being aware of one particular thing, the way the tube felt being taped against my arm, and wishing I could reach out and move it, and then back into the nothingness. I think that I was somewhat aware of the fact that I was a little more aware each time that this happened, but honestly I am not certain of even that much. Waking up was sudden. So sudden. I was in blackness. Had a moment of awareness. Like my neck hurts, and then the pain was magnitudes higher. No longer a distant perception, but something that I was actively conscious of. Waking up was the most painful moment of my life, and I just started crying and then couldn't even cry. It hurt so bad. I think that had more to do with injuries sustained to my neck and head than the coma. But that is what it was like. After an hour my body was used to the pain and I was totally normal. Albeit very weak, hungry, and thirsty. I survived and am fine now without any lasting issues. It was dark. I was in one for 4 months a couple of years ago. And it didn't feel like 4 months. Just like a long sleep. With the occasional memory of my mom crying or begging me to wake up. I remember this vividly. I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by my friends and family, and the first thing I remember asking was, "You should have posted this with the serious tag. Angry upvote. Listen here, you little S.M." I've tried to explain it a few times, but honestly it's life-changing. It's one of those experiences that are almost impossible to explain, but you're a different person afterwards. Not just because of the brain damage on my part, or the physical therapy you need to learn basic motor functions. It's like visiting another realm of reality. I was in one for like 2 weeks. I would not wish it on anyone. For me, I was in a long dream. I did realize I was asleep for a long time. I was still able to feel and hear, which was interpreted into my dream. Example, my hands were restrained so I would not pull out any tubes, and my dream was that I was being held in a prison. What a bad dream. Imagine if you were in a coma and the dream was constant good, like an island filled with coke and computers.